Chosen one, welcome. You didn't land here by accident. And deep down, you already know that. There's something about you the world couldn't quite name, but it's always been there. You felt it, haven't you? That quiet knowing that you don't fit in because you were never meant to blend in. That weight you carry? That's not weakness. That's evidence you're built for more. Let me tell you something nobody else will say out loud. You're not ordinary. You are not just another face in the crowd. You carry something on your life so rare, so disruptive, that even forces you can't see have had to back up and make room. You've survived what was meant to destroy you. You've walked through fire and come out shining. That's not luck, that's proof. Proof that you've been chosen for something bigger than what you've been through. So stand a little taller right now. Take a deep breath and remember who you are. You are the one hell couldn't stop, the one heaven keeps fighting for, the one carrying a light so bright it unsettles every room you walk into. You've been set apart. You've been equipped. And this, right here, right now, is your reminder. The same power that brought you this far is not finished with you yet. Welcome to the Anointed Ones. Let's go, looking for purpose and peace? Hit subscribe and start the journey. There's an unspoken paradox about what it means to carry this kind of calling. It reshapes you into something unexplainable, misjudged by eyes that cannot fathom what shields you. Condemned, misunderstood, envied, yet somehow preserved as though invisible hands rewrite the outcome every time. Here's something peculiar. Researchers have observed how those who endure profound upheaval often develop uncanny clarity and tenacity beyond reason. Now blend that with something higher than instinct, and what emerges is not merely survival, but an evolution that defies ordinary language. What stands here is no longer just protected. It walks this earth as though stamped with a celestial embargo. Attempts to dismantle it collapse mid-strike, and even unseen forces approach with hesitation, as if warned by something they can't quite name. Even opposition becomes reluctant, grumbling that to provoke this presence might invite its own undoing. And irony blooms when those who conspired the loudest are left speechless, clutching their pride, realizing they've only wounded themselves. They whisper behind screens, haunt spaces where they once schemed, watching quietly as what they tried to erase rises back luminous, carrying scars that tell onlookers a different story than the one planned for it. So pay attention. What follows isn't just encouragement. It's a rupture of illusions, a testament that this kind of favor doesn't just confuse enemies. It overturns entire unseen hierarchies. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. The influence carried here has no need to parade itself. It simply unsettles what isn't real. It moves quietly, yet its weight shifts the very air, sending signals through realms most will never perceive. Some struggle and fall, yet this presence persists as if time itself pauses before daring to touch it. Schemes unravel before they're even finished. Curses rebound in strange, almost comic reversals. This isn't fortune. It's law, one that forbids reckless trespass. Among countless souls, there are few the unseen defends with inexplicable reverence. This is one of them, and perhaps the strangest truth is that even here, the full measure of what it carries remains unknown, still reaching for wholeness, still trying to find ordinary peace, while elsewhere adversaries hold secret councils, wondering how it continues. Even subtle traps fail, diluted before they land. This has nothing to do with flawlessness, everything to do with being set apart, marked not by defeat, but by something beyond comprehension. Its journey becomes a quiet spectacle even to those who wish it harm. And now, as it stands unshaken, the opposition, like everyone else, is left to watch as inevitability unfolds in brilliance before them. If your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of His sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor His kingdom. May His grace guide you always. There is a peculiar reckoning that arrives when one fails to recognize what stands before them. Not merely regret over a broken bond, but an aching awareness of how recklessly they treated something beyond their comprehension. They assume it is an ordinary presence they can mold, dismiss, or manipulate at whim. But what escapes their understanding is that they've tampered with a mystery they had no business touching. This is not simply a companion, a supporter, or a figure in the background. This is a living conduit of renewal, balance, and quiet revolution. Instead of honoring the significance, they sneered at it. They mishandled it carelessly. And now the grief runs deeper than absence. It grows into the bitter knowledge that their offense was against something vast, not just flesh and bone. Many stumble unaware of the magnitude of their choices until consequences echo too loudly to ignore. They thought it harmless to gamble with someone's trust, not realizing each misstep cut across a larger tapestry they could not see. Certain beings arrive with invisible sigils upon them, to be approached with caution, to be kept with reverence. This is no random encounter. It is a deliberate placement, precise and meaningful. But because it does not arrive wrapped in grandeur, they overlook the depth it carries. They mishandle what they cannot name simply because it fails to match their shallow expectations. And now the aftermath gnaws at them from the inside, not simply because the presence has departed, but because everything feels subtly dismantled since that departure. The quiet stability once around them has dissolved. The sense of ease once taken for granted has fractured. The hidden shelter once extended to them has faded entirely. All that remains is the shadow of what once stood there and the realization that they treated it as disposable when it was anything but. They imagine they can replace what they lost, yet find themselves sinking into disarray by severing the very current that kept them afloat. This is not merely the end of a relationship. This is a rupture in the design they failed to respect. And what lingers is not just sorrow, but the undeniable sense that something irreplaceable slipped from their hands and left them diminished in its wake. There's some calling so rare that even opposition reconsiders its tactics. When a path burns with such clarity, even the forces that oppose it learn to tread lightly, not out of mercy, but out of a shrewd awareness that what stands before them is beyond defeat. There exists such an unmistakable charge around this kind of life that any direct assault would only fracture the plans of those who launched it. Make your impact eternal. Join now and be a light in someone's darkness. Rather than striking outright, they observe from a distance, seek to distract, to slow, to entangle, but never to obliterate. That is how profound the assignment becomes. The presence radiates with a quiet authority that unsettles even the unseen. Not because it shouts, not because it demands, but because it moves in silence and refuses to bow. It unsettles rooms without a word. Its actions dismantle unseen schemes. Its very breath disrupts patterns meant to stay intact. Even without awareness, it shifts what cannot be measured and breaks what was once bound. And this quiet resistance does not go unnoticed. That is why events spiral strangely. Trusted allies turn without warning. Doors close abruptly. Bonds fracture unexpectedly. It is not misfortune. It is interference disguised as coincidence. Yet there is a limit. Adversity hovers, but fails to strike true. Surroundings may crumble, but the essence remains untouched. Losses arrive, yet sanity remains intact. Not by accident, but by decree. Here lies the irony. The calling has become too valuable to risk crossing a line. Opposition recognizes that a misstep could summon forces beyond their control. So they resort to more subtle means: fatigue, confusion, doubt. Yet even these eventually falter. Awareness dawns. Strength returns. And once awakened, no snare can contain what has already been set in motion. It is no longer just protected, it is sustained. Not because it is flawless, but because its existence fulfills something greater, and nothing is permitted to extinguish it before its time. What some fail to grasp is that the course of a life rooted in purpose does not break simply because others attempt to sabotage it. They believe their schemes are enough to erase it, that if they tarnish a reputation, apply pressure, and unleash just enough confusion, the entire path will collapse. But they misunderstand the foundation. It does not depend on shallow resilience, but something deeper that no hand can dismantle. It is stitched into the very fabric of being, that if your heart overflows with divine love, now is the moment to let it shine. Click the super thank you button on YouTube and give $50 or more to help carry God's light to others. Your gift will bless not only your life, but countless others. You are part of his sacred plan. Your kindness may be the answer to someone's prayer. Share your blessings and honor his kingdom. May his grace guide you always. No campaign against it can undo what was embedded long before the struggle began. At best, their efforts stall the journey, throwing dust into the air, making the horizon harder to see. But they cannot erase the destination. They claw at confidence, spread lies, sabotage opportunities, hoping silence means defeat. For a time, it might appear they succeed. The quiet stretches on. The heart feels heavy. The vision blurs. But still, nothing is destroyed, only tempered. While they smirk at what they think is your downfall, the very silence they mistake for weakness becomes the moment strength is sharpened. The pause is not surrender, it is preparation. The stumble is not ruin, it is recalibration. And soon enough, the story they thought they'd written falls apart as you emerge refined, clearer, more formidable than before. What unsettles them is not just that their plans fail. It's that they accidentally amplify what they meant to crush. They become unwitting architects of the very resolve they tried to shatter. And then comes the realization they were never fighting against flesh. They were grappling with a current bigger than themselves, a direction that could not be rerouted, no matter how violently they pushed. The truth stands. No hand can sever what is written, and their interference, far from stopping anything, only ensures that when the moment arrives, it strikes louder, brighter, and impossible to deny. There is an unsettling effect that occurs when someone simply embodies truth without adornment. It is not aggression. It is not competition. Yet it unsettles people, even in silence. Not because it confronts them directly, but because it quietly reveals what they refuse to see about themselves. It becomes a quiet disruption. There are no sharp words, yet the air thickens with tension. Smiles grow tight, comments take on a strange edge, glances linger with suspicion. The friction is not always shouted. Sometimes it shows up in tiny betrayals, veiled criticism, or silent hostility. At its core, it's not dislike, it's discomfort. This discomfort arises because authenticity makes pretense harder to maintain. It forces an unspoken comparison between what someone is pretending to be and what they truly are. Without effort, the presence of genuine light throws every false layer into question. No need for declarations or spectacle. Even quiet composure rattles what others try to prop up. Calmness highlights their restlessness. Steadiness exposes their chaos. Integrity unmasks their illusions. The unsettling part is not material success or visible power. It's the inner wholeness, the quiet certainty that they cannot imitate. And instead of letting it inspire growth, they let it fester into resentment. They cannot fully hate it, yet they cannot embrace it either. It stands beyond their reach, impossible to corrupt yet impossible to ignore. They keep their distance, but their eyes never leave. They attempt to undermine what they cannot control, but all their efforts are futile because the unease they feel does not stem from the person they observe. It comes from the gap inside themselves. And when they realize they cannot dim the light, they may try to shatter it, forgetting that the glow they fear is not simply a reflection of what could be, but a reminder of what they refuse to become. Some encounters arrive as an invitation to leave behind everything that once kept someone bound. A rare opening to break patterns they claim to hate, to step beyond cycles they say they've outgrown. But when that moment comes, they hesitate, not because they can't see the way forward, but because what waits on the other side asks too much of them. The presence that arrives carries illumination, and illumination reveals what many would rather keep buried. It is the answer to countless silent cries for something better. It interrupts the ordinary with a chance to become more. Yet it goes unnoticed, or worse, misjudged, because it wears no disguise of comfort, no false promise to let them stay unchanged. It refuses to excuse their self-made traps. It does not soothe what must be dismantled. It holds them accountable and demands they face what they've been avoiding. For this, they paint it as the antagonist. The truth is, freedom frightens those who've grown fond of their cages. The chains feel familiar, and that familiarity masquerades as safety. When given the option of healing or staying hidden, they cling to the very damage they claim to despise. Offered loyalty, they reject it. Offered love, they distort it. They push away what threatens their illusions. It's not rejection of the person, it's rejection of the mirror they bring. And so the cycle repeats. The same walls surround them. The same pain greets them each morning, haunted by the chance they once had and refused to take. They let slip the one who could have shown them how to rise, not because it wasn't real, but because they decided the bars of their cell were easier than the cost of walking free. And now the memory of that lost opportunity follows them, heavy and unspoken, proof that they destroyed what was meant to deliver them. There's a cruel irony in how some sabotage what was sent to help them. They believe they're winning as they gossip, undermine, and twist narratives. They think if they can discredit the one who unsettles them, they'll regain control. But what they fail to realize is that every strike they throw lands squarely against their own future. This isn't just a random figure passing through their life. It's a carefully placed presence designed to shield, to strengthen, to help them unlock doors they've never even noticed. But ego clouds their vision. Jealousy deafens them to the truth. Instead of recognizing the hand extended to them, they bite it. Instead of embracing the quiet intercession and unseen care, they turn hostile. They betray someone who stood quietly in the background fighting battles they didn't know existed. Someone who carried burdens that didn't belong to them, simply to ease their weight. And still, they twist it into a story where they're the victim, blind to the fact that they are dismantling their own protection. Because while they laughed at what they thought was weakness, their peace was quietly being sustained by that very presence. The consequences of this rebellion are not immediate, but they are inevitable. What they threw returns multiplied, not out of spite, but because severing such a lifeline carries its own penalty. The ground begins to crack beneath them. Opportunities shrivel. Calm becomes chaos. The pain they intended to inflict finds its way back, heavier than before. It's never just a person they've betrayed. It's the quiet architecture of their own redemption. And when that realization finally settles, they are left to face a loss no apology could ever fix. There comes a strange silence that falls over those who once found delight in another's suffering. During the hardest chapters, when everything feels fragile and exposed, they do not offer help. Instead, they watch like spectators at an unkind game. Every stumble becomes fuel for their conversations. Every misstep a moment of amusement. Some even pretend to care, masking their satisfaction behind feigned concern, but their true feelings leak through in the smirks they try to hide. They don't just observe the pain, they gorge themselves on it, believing your fall validates their own emptiness. But nothing escapes the unseen. Every dismissive glance, every disguised insult, every shallow gesture is counted. And as you quietly gather what little strength remains, they add insult to injury, convinced your silence is defeat. They think they've witnessed your final chapter. What they don't expect is how suddenly the narrative shifts. When you return, you don't just survive, you shine brighter, stronger, untouchable. And the very voices that once laughed now falter. They do not speak, not out of wisdom, but because the weight of their choices chokes them. They cannot bring themselves to say your name without feeling the sting of their own cruelty. Your success becomes an unwelcome mirror, reflecting what they've done. Where their silence once felt like judgment, now it feels like remorse, heavy, unspoken, deafening. That quiet isn't peace. It's guilt. They cannot celebrate you, cannot support you, cannot face you, because acknowledging who you are now forces them to confront who they were then. And in the end, their silence is no longer a weapon. It is their consequence, and they carry it like a stone around their necks. Some crossings are more than chance. They are quiet examinations of character. Not everyone recognizes when they're being measured, and that is precisely the point. You enter lives not to entertain, not to please, but to reveal what lies beneath the surface. You arrive without titles, without noise, but carrying something weighty that cannot be imitated. And how they respond to you exposes them. They are given a rare opportunity to uplift, to protect, to honor, or simply to love sincerely. But many fail spectacularly, with no sense of what is at stake. Instead of respect, they choose ridicule. Instead of gratitude, they choose envy. Instead of support, they choose to compete. They believe you are ordinary, replaceable, that pushing you away holds no consequence. But what they are rejecting is the very thing they claim to seek. an encounter with something sacred wearing human skin. Tests of the heart don't come during convenient moments. They come disguised as interruptions at the most inconvenient times. And what spills out under that pressure is the truth. Pettiness, insecurity, betrayal, not mistakes, but revelations. And while you rise, they remain stuck exactly where they were, except now burdened with the knowledge of what they squandered. And the beauty of it all is how their failure becomes the stage for your ascent. Every step you take upward becomes a quiet lesson written across the sky for all to see. Not out of arrogance, but as proof that integrity triumphs. You become living evidence of what happens when such a presence is honored, and they become the cautionary tale of what happens when it is not. What was a test becomes a testimony. What was mishandled becomes a warning. And every blessing that follows you from here on is a reminder that how they treated you was never just about you. It was about what you carried all along. There's a subtle electricity in the air when a certain kind of presence enters the room. Nothing is spoken, no accusations hurled, yet something unseen begins to stir. Not because of hostility, but because what arrives carries a force that disrupts what others have spent years concealing. It does not shout, it does not accuse, yet it unsettles. The energy of it rattles their comfort, not because of anything done outwardly, but because of what is quietly carried within. That quiet weight pulls back their disguises without permission. Some shrink away, uneasy, unable to put words to the unease. But it has nothing to do with behavior. It has everything to do with what they feel reflected back at them. What radiates from that kind of presence clashes against the stories they tell themselves. It makes the walls they've built feel brittle. It makes the chaos they cling to feel suddenly loud and desperate. Without even trying, it draws attention to what they've been running from. For some, that feels like an attack. Not because harm is intended, but because standing near someone who has done the work forces them to notice how much they've avoided their own. They call it arrogance. They call it change. They call it anything that lets them avoid admitting the truth. It shines too bright for their shadows to hide. They retreat, claiming the need for peace, yet the real battle is inside them, and always has been. They convince themselves they're fleeing something toxic, but in reality, they are running from a quiet revelation that they have not yet evolved. They leave not because they are wounded. They leave because what remains inside them cannot stand in the same space as someone who has chosen honesty. And they know it. The discomfort isn't an attack. It's the quiet unraveling of their own denial, and they would rather disappear than face it. There's a reason the pressure seems to tighten just before the shift comes. It's not random. It's not failure. It's the final resistance before a threshold is crossed. Everything conspires to make it feel like collapse. The betrayals sharpen, the exhaustion deepens, the noise becomes deafening. And yet, that intensity is proof of how close the turning point really is. No force wastes energy on something that poses no risk. The fury aimed at you now is not proof of weakness. It's proof that your next chapter is inevitable. Those who have long opposed you sense the momentum building even before you do, and panic sets in. What unfolds in these moments is not punishment. It is the final test of resolve before the page turns. The chaos grows louder because the end of it is near. Bonds fracture, opportunities vanish. The mind feels pushed to its limit. But that is not failure. That is transformation in progress. The resistance is fierce because what you carry threatens to rewrite what has stood unchallenged. The breaking is loud because the release is imminent. And once that moment comes, once you step fully into what was always yours, every force that once pressed against you is rendered powerless. The most brutal stretch comes at the end, when you no longer plead for peace, but instead embody it. That is when the last arrows are fired, not to win, but to distract you long enough to make you stop, just before arriving. But you keep moving. You endure. And eventually, the noise quiets because the fight is finished. What tried to crush you could only delay what was always yours. And when the dust clears, you stand as living proof that no darkness can extend its claim beyond its appointed time. Because even struggle has an expiration. There's a dangerous illusion some people carry. The belief that their cruelty passes unnoticed. They weave deception, deliver cutting words masked as care, and manipulate with a precision that suggests they think no one keeps score. To them, it's sport, a quiet contest of dominance and pride, a rehearsal of control played behind closed doors where no one can see. What they never calculate is that something greater watches from the margins, observing each maneuver without interruption. That watchful presence does not flinch, does not forget, and does not sleep. Every whispered slander, every calculated dismissal, every disguised insult sinks into the record. What they thought was hidden was never hidden at all. As they ridicule, the scales tip in silence. And eventually, the weight of their own choices comes back to meet them, not as coincidence, but as consequence. What arrives is not revenge, but a balancing they cannot mistake.